We just got that.
Good news.
Like that. We just got that from where? Is that?
Yes.
Already.
So the Shabbat that preceded that event was the day when the Jewish people took a sheep, a lamb, that they were going to use for the Korban Pesach. And in Egypt, the sheep, the lamb, was one of the animals that was worshipped. That was a deity. Like in India today, they're the cows, are somehow considered to be holy. And in Japan, when I was in Japan, the midget deer that exist, they are considered to be holy. They're considered to have within them the spirit of one's deceased ancestors. So these midget deer roam free, and you're not allowed to harm them. And therefore, they're very brazen. They come up to you, they put their nose into your pocket to look for food. So in Egypt, the sheep had that quality that people felt that they had a holiness to them, a deity to it. And the Jews are taking the sheep that they're going to slaughter. So that took a great deal of strength on the part of the Jewish people to do so. And it was miraculous that the Egyptians did not react to it. They let it happen. So the Torah says that that's why it's called Shabbat HaGadol, because on the Shabbat before Pesach, this great declaration of faith on the part of the Jewish people occurred. And this great miracle happened, that there was no reaction to it from the Egyptian taskmasters who had oppressed the Jews for so many decades and even centuries. So that's why it's called Shabbat HaGadol, the Torah says. Over the ages, there have been different theories advanced. One of the theories is because of the Haftarah that we read from the Navi Malachi, the final words of Nevuah given to the Jewish people. So the Navi says, "Hine anochi shaleach lachem es Eliyahu hanavi." God says, "I will send to you the prophet Eliyahu. Lifnei bo yom Hashem hagodol v'anorah." Before the great day of God, the day of judgment, the day of redemption, the day when all of the reckonings will be made whole. Ve'eshiv le'vavos al bonim, ve'leiv bonim al avosam, and there will now be a unity of generations, and that will be the great day. And Pesach represents that day. So therefore, since we read this Haftarah on Shabbat before Pesach, so therefore the Shabbat is called after the name of the Haftarah. The Haftarah is Hagadol, Lifnei Bo Yom Hashem, Hagadol V'Hanorah. So therefore the Shabbat is called Shabbat Hagadol. There's a third, there are many, many interpretations. The Lord always provided room for rabbis. So it says in the Haftarah, Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi, Asher Tzivisi Oso B'Chorev Al Yisrael Chukim U'Mishpatim. Remember the Torah of my servant Moshe. So in the Navi, the word Zichru, the Zion is written very big. And therefore, the Meforshim say that that's to emphasize the importance of this pasuk. Remember the Torah of Moshe, because there'll be a lot of Torahs out there. Everybody thinks that they're right. So the Navi wants to emphasize that what Torah should we remember? The Torah of Moshe. That he commanded all of Israel to perform the mitzvahs and to observe the rituals of the Torah. Since the Zion is written big, it's written gigantic, so therefore the Shabbos is already called Shabbat HaGadol. But I saw something this week, I didn't see it, but I was made aware of it, that I think is I can't say a better answer, God forbid, but I think that's something that we can take with us in greater appreciation than perhaps the other theories that have been advanced here until now. Chazal, the rabbis of the Medrash and of the Talmud, and naturally of later generations, all wondered how the Jewish people survived spiritually the slavery of Egypt. Because we see the slavery had a great effect upon them, even when they become free. They're never free of idolatry for centuries. They're never free of the psychological burdens of being oppressed and of being a slave. So how did they merit redemption? If we say redemption is something that has to be earned, so that is the discussion in the Talmud about redemption in our time? Is that something that we have to earn? Or is it something that will occur in spite of the fact that we don't deserve it? And that's an ongoing discussion throughout all of Jewish history. And if you think about it, that's the discussion that we have today. So what happened in Egypt? What kept the Jewish people going, so to speak? A nation of slaves in a society of immorality and of paganism. Egypt was the apex of the culture of the time. It was the great empire. So the Gemara teaches us that there were two things that kept them going, so to speak, kept them Jewish. Now, you can be Jewish and be an idolater. It doesn't, they're not mutually exclusive. But at least it kept them Jewish. It allowed them to hope that redemption would come. So the Talmud tells us what were the two things. One was Shabbat. Moshe was able to prevail upon the Pharaoh that he should give them a day off. He said, "You're running a very inefficient society." Now, we all know that slavery is the most inefficient form of economic production that exists. Stalin had the Gulag build the great canal from the White Sea to the Arctic Ocean. They built it by hand, so that a few 100,000 people died on the way building it. But it never was usable. Because it was made by slave labor. Slave labor does not take any pride in its efforts. It doesn't make any adjustments to make it work. And in fact, almost all of the time, it sabotages the project that it is doing. I was listening to an audio book this week about war production in Germany, based on the writings of Albert Speer, the German minister of production, who was an absolute genius. Later on, he was part of American society. And he said that the use of slave labor cut German industrial production by 30 to 40%. And he told Hitler that not to use slave labor, but to use German civilians, so to speak, women. Now, Hitler was a prude. He didn't know women were allowed to work. Women were there to get pregnant and have babies. So he said you should bring the women into the factories, which is what happened in the West, England and the United States, certainly in the Soviet Union. And to get rid of the slave labor because they're a drag. But naturally, you couldn't convince Hitler of anything. So Moshe tells Pharaoh, you're defeating yourself. You want to build Pithom and Ramses? You want to build giant cities and using the Jews as your laborers? If you don't give them a day off, your production will slacken. And Pharaoh and his wise men agreed. So they agreed that on Shabbos they could be off. Seventh day of the week they could be off. They didn't work. But it says that was one catalyst for holiness amongst the Jewish people. That there was a special day of the week that they weren't slaves. Which, if we think about Shabbat, generally, that is the concept that one day of the week we are not slaves. We don't work, we don't earn money, we don't talk about mundane things. We are not, it's not Tuesday. We're free. And then there was a second thing the Gemara says. And that was that they had the Megillot. They had scrolls. Now, there are those that say that these scrolls were the forerunner to the actual Torah that Moshe would come down from Sinai. Others say that the scrolls themselves had no holiness to them, but all agree that the scrolls, to a certain extent, told them the history of their people, told them that there was an Abraham in the world and a Yitzchak and a Yaakov, told them that they had a Jew by the name of Yosef that really saved Egypt, and that's how they came down to Egypt. It told them they didn't come down because they wanted to move to Egypt, that they had a country of their own, and that they wanted to go back to their country. But on the way, all of these things happened. The Pharaoh enslaved them. You had the story of Joseph and his brothers, etc., etc. All of this was written in the Megillot that they had. The Gemara calls it the Gilionot. It was like a notebook. And Shabbos, they would read these stories. I remember that when I published my first history book, so I got a call from someone. When you get a call from someone, you know he's not calling to give you a compliment. He says, can we read your history book on Shabbat? So I said, well, that presupposes a few things. It presupposes you have the book. And it presupposes you know how to read. I don't understand what the question is. He said, no, on Shabbat you're supposed to Torah and holy things and, you know, what this is the history book, you know. So I told him that I thought that the history book had a certain holiness to it also, because it told you who you were. And a Jew that doesn't know who one is pretty much at a loss. And how can you know who you are if you don't know? You don't know your grandfather. You don't know anything. You don't know how we got here, what we're doing here. So they had these Gilionot, they had these notebooks. And the notebooks told them the story of the Jewish people. Told them about Avraham Avinu and the 10 tests, and the Akedah of Yitzchak, and that Yaakov and Lavan and the 12 sons and the tribes. They knew all of that. So the Gemara says these were the two things that kept them Jewish. The Shabbat, the realization that there is such a thing as a Shabbat, and the second thing was the Gilionot, which gave them a feeling of national identity and of personal accomplishment and who they were, and it taught them that they're not slaves. They're not inferior. So on that, we have that when Moshe came, when the Medrash teaches us, when Moshe came, so what was Pharaoh's reaction to Moshe? So with the Torah, it says that Pharaoh told Moshe, Nirpim atem, Nirpim. What a bunch of lazy people. You want a day off? I'm going to make it more. So the Medrash says Tichbar Aleim Avoda means that he took away the Shabbat. Until then, they had somehow prevailed. And the Medrash says that Aaron was the one that accomplished it, that they were off on Shabbat. And now when Moshe came with his demands, we're going to leave, we're going to go for 3 days in the desert, you're going to give us cattle. So Pharaoh said, forget it. No Shabbat. Tichbar aleim avoda. We'll make it worse. Until now you work 6 days, now you're going to work 7 days. So he took away the Shabbat. And then he said, Yishu b'divrei shoker. And let them not rely on false words. What are the false words? So the Poshet Pshat, the simple explanation is, the false words were that Moshe said, I'm going to take you out. All the language of redemption that we're going to say on the Seder night. But the Medrash says the false words were the Gilionot. The books that they were reading. So Pharaoh said there never was an Abraham. Yeah, the whole story with Yitzchak is made up, and Yaakov is made up, and Yosef certainly. That's why it says Asher lo yodas Yosef. He made it that nobody knew about Yosef. No, it's a made-up story. And we are well aware in our time how even in the most sophisticated society that perhaps civilization has ever produced, stories are made up. You don't know what's true and what isn't true. You don't know what to believe. So Pharaoh took away the Gilionot. That's what he said, Yishu b'divrei shoker. Let them not depend on false words, on stories, on a history that never was. part of the struggle that exists here in Israel today that we are part of. So this thing, I'm not here to really clear up any matters. But this argument is not over judicial reform. That's the cover story. Everybody agrees you need judicial reform, whether it's 2 judges or 3 judges, who picks them? Okay, that's all of that to straighten out. This struggle is far deeper. It's for the soul of why we're here, what we're supposed to be. And after 75 years, this struggle cannot be easily papered over any longer, because there's too strong a religious element in the country. And therefore, you have this struggle. So it's for the control of education. What are you going to teach the children in Kita Vav, Kita Zion? What are you going to teach them about the Jewish people? You're going to teach them about the Rambam, the Rashba? Are you going to teach them Chernichovsky? That's a basic question, to which there are no easy answers. What kind of public Sabbath do you want? Private Sabbath we can live with. You do what you want, I'll do what I want. But I want the train to take me to where I want to go. And you say the train is against everything that the Jewish people have stood for centuries. Multiply that 100 issues. You say the hospitals should not be allowed to have chometz on Pesach in the Jewish state. Privately, you want to have it, like nobody's going to stop you. But officially, there's no chometz on Pesach. And the other side says, no, why not? We're not making you eat it. We're just going to have it. So that's the argument there. And that's a very deep argument. And like you go to the dentist, so you feel good. And then he hits the nerve, and then you realize why you went to the dentist. You hit the nerve finally. So Pharaoh said, no Shabbos, no Gilionot, no Jewish identity, no history, nothing. So in response to that, the Meforshim say the Lord had to take them out, because now they would not survive. If there would be no Shabbat, if there would be no Gilionot, they never would survive. They would never leave Egypt. That's why we say, if God would not have taken them out, we would still be there. We'd still be living in Silicon Valley. No matter how bad it is. So therefore, he adjusted the time to take them out. And that's why it's called Shabbat HaGadol. Because Pesach teaches us the greatness of Shabbat. Pesach teaches us that Shabbat is the key to our redemption. Pesach teaches us that the catalyst for the eternity of the Jewish people is the Shabbat. And it has remained so till today. It is the way we measure things. And therefore, Pesach is intimately related to Shabbat. So the Shabbat before Pesach teaches us that it's Shabbat HaGadol. Every Shabbat is great. The greatness of Shabbat is that it brings to the redemption of the Jewish people. That it brings to all of the hopes that we have for the fulfillment of the prophecies extended to us over the ages. And that is Shabbat HaGadol, HaGadol v'Hanora, that the Ribono Shalom should bring upon us b'meira v'yameinu, amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach. We will resume Parsha Shmini. That's 2 weeks from today.
And tomorrow is,
Tomorrow, Shabbos HaGadol, Joshua. Mincha is what time tomorrow? 6:15. And the movie of Abarbanel is the Sunday after Pesach in Pelech School. If you didn't make your reservation yet, please do so. And if you didn't make your reservation, but you want to come, but we'll find place for you. Shabbat Shalom.
What's the title? Word Nisano?
The title is Shabbat HaGadol. Fine.
Have a bracha.
For you. Should be matzliach and only have danchas and good health.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful.
Here, Rabbi. Just here for 4 days.
Good enough.
Shabbat Shiur, we're back from America.
Wonderful.
Yes. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah.
So,
Doesn't it say Yismach Moshe with Matzah started that because Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the
Yeah.
Shabbat? He said, "Ah, it's good."
yeah, so there's
It's too